overview of rules and regulations. There's a very involved thing that they got with the state. It's like 400 pages long, so we're not going to be going through everything, but we're going through most of the stuff that matters to us. And if there's any questions, I'll be passing this second headset around. Just raise your hand, we can pass it to you, and you can ask a question on the loudspeaker. We're going to be doing a live cast on the computer right here, and we're also filming it on the camera over there so we can post it up later on so we can have all this information for the future. So if anyone doesn't want to be on camera, just don't step this way. But other than that, pretty much this is John Lucy. He's one of the top cannabis attorneys in Portland, Oregon, and he's been such a great guy to come out and bless us with his presence and talk about his area of expertise, which is the law. So that's what's on a lot of people's minds at the moment. So this would be a great time to address all of our concerns.
Yeah, no worries. Hey, everybody, I'm John Lucy. I own Law 420. I primarily do civil, business, administrative law for marijuana. Thankfully these days, because marijuana is legal in Oregon, I think everybody should give a round of applause for that, because it used to not be that way. And I know a lot of you, because I've represented a lot of you, particularly some of you back when it was still illegal and you were looking to go to prison. So it's great that we're here now. What I'm going to be talking about today is primarily related to extraction, what most people would call, a lot of people would call concentrates. In Oregon, we make a distinction between concentrates and extracts in a way that other states don't. Under Oregon law, extracts are products that are derived using hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons are a specific class of chemicals. The state of Oregon seems to think that CO2 is a hydrocarbon, which means they failed chemistry. It's not, but it's included in the list of hydrocarbons when it's used with high heat and pressure to make an extract. And when we talk about extract means anything that is extracted with, for example, the common ones are going to be butane, propane, hexane. There's some others in there too you can use as well. Anything that uses those hydrocarbon chemicals is going to be considered an extract. And under Oregon law, the legislature decided, which we knew was coming, but they kind of surprised us by throwing an emergency clause into it. They suddenly banned the production of extracts without a processor's license. And for a very long time, things had been set up in such a way that manufacture of marijuana, including extracts, was under Oregon Health Authority. If you had a medical marijuana grower's card, patient card, caregiver card, you could operate a processor's equipment, so 5-pound unit, 1-pound unit, half-pound unit, anything that was using butane, propane, hexane, any of those chemicals, without having to necessarily go through an additional licensing process. That's recently changed, as we've all probably are aware of. And what happened was there was a giant hullabaloo about that, because lots of people were processing, lots of people were making extracts, lots of people were providing extracts not only in forms like shatter and in oil form, but also a lot of those extracts were actually being used for edible production. And so what that did is it suddenly made all the dispensaries unable to purchase those products. And the reaction from Oregon Health Authority was, well, we'll get around to making rules for it, and that's probably going to take a month or two. And the response was, that's not acceptable. And we ended up with an emergency rule situation where they created a licensing process. That licensing process has since started. There was about a 2-week gap. Well, there was actually about a 3.5-week gap while that all got sorted out. But as of last week, if you submit an application to the Oregon Health Authority, you will give them $500, which they will never, ever, ever give back to you. And you will give them $3,500, which they may give back to you if they reject your application. And there was no fraud or deception or anything else in the application. It just so happens that it didn't qualify. Those applications are usable until October 1st if they haven't been processed through fully. So anyone who gets in a fully completed application from here on out for a processor's license to Oregon Health Authority submits all the paperwork that they require, and we can go through that step by step later as we kind of answer people's questions. You will get a number, and that is essentially a magic number. And you will also get a copy showing that you've submitted everything, you've paid for everything, and eventually, assuming Oregon Health Authority gets around to it, they have promised us that they will put your name on a page at the Oregon Health Authority website that will allow dispensaries to see that you have submitted an application, it's in process, and that they can legally purchase extracts from you if you're selling extracts, and that you can legally manufacture extracts. As it stands right now, the manufacture of extracts without one of those licenses in the state of Oregon is now a felony. So, you know, we've come full circle in a lot of ways. It used to be that everything having to do with marijuana was a felony, and we all went to prison. Now we're at the point where the vast majority of people who are associated with marijuana are not going to go to prison, but those of us who are heavily involved in the industry or work in the industry or deal with the industry are regulated at a level that none of us have ever had to deal with before. I always tell people, I used to be a criminal defense lawyer. There's about 5 pages of material that we would go through in order to look at the criminal statutes, about 100 cases that I kind of knew off the top of my head that applied to most cases. Now, for most clients, there is somewhere between 200 to a little over 500 pages of administrative rules, statutory rules, case law, and other things that have to be applied. And so just to give you an idea of that, we've gone from this much text to 2 or 3 Bibles worth of text. And that's really hard for most people to stay in compliance with. So for a lot of people have stopped producing. As of right now, if you do want to produce and you do want to process extracts, you have to have certain systems to do so. One of those systems happens to be Subzero system. And by the way, I'm an attorney for Subzero. I'm also an attorney for some other people in the room as well. And one thing I would ask is during this, let's not get too detailed about questions. If you want to ask a question about kind of a generalized area, a hypothetical, that's fine. But if you want to ask me whether or not OHA is going to allow me to do processing in my spark-proof room on the blueprint that I have here in my hands that, you know, shows my address and all that, I'd prefer that not be on a live telecast stream. I'd prefer that be something that you come and talk to me in private about. This is more of a generalized session. If I gave each of you a minute, we would go over time. So more hypothetical questions, more generalized questions is what we're kind of looking at tonight. One of the other things I want to say is the processor's licenses for OLCC are a completely different beast right now. If you are processing with the idea of selling to the recreational market right now, you will be able to process extracts that can then later be sold in the limited recreational market, which continues through to the end of the year through medical dispensaries. However, once that's done, you will have to be producing products to be sold into the medical market stream or the recreational market stream, depending on which license type you hold, unless you're holding both license types, unless they change the administrative rules again at the OLCC level to allow medical processors to sell their products into the recreational stream, which may well happen because those rules expire in June rather than later in the year when actually everything will start coming online for those dispensaries. So a lot of those are hypothetical questions that we don't know the answers to yet, and those will come with time. Let's see. Everyone know the big major websites. This is probably the easiest way to understand what's going on. MMJ.Oregon.gov. That will take you to the Oregon Health Authority's website. You need that one. If you don't know that website or don't understand it, you need to go home and you probably need to read everything on it, write out a list of questions and figure out more so the things you don't know rather than the things you do know. That website is going to instruct you on how to deal with almost the entirety of the medical marijuana program. The second site you're going to need is marijuana.oregon.gov. That's the OLCC's direct link website. That will take you to all the applications for them. The big thing that each one of these websites have, they have the rules, they have the application links, and they also have the statutory bulletin updates. And so, unfortunately, the law has gotten really, really complex in this area because we've got a lot of different layers to it. Just so you understand what's happening here, in Oregon we have case law. And case law is what happens when people go to court and courts interpret the statutory law. The statutory law is what's made by the legislature, or occasionally it's made by the people in the form of the referendums that we have in Oregon. For example, when we legalized marijuana. That was done as a popular initiative rather than something that came from the legislature. The legislature can then go back and change those rules. Those rules are found under what's called the Oregon Revised Statutes. ORS 475 and 475B, those are the ones you care about. Those are the ones that deal with marijuana. Those are the ones that deal with medical marijuana. Those are available through OLIS. OLIS is the Oregon Legislative Index? I forget what it's, Oregon Legislative Information System. Sorry, I use the acronym all the time. I don't actually look at what it says. So OLIS then allows you to look at current statutory law, also statutory law that's been passed into law but hasn't been actually implemented yet. If you go to mmj.oregon.gov, they will actually link you to the Oregon revised statutes that have just been passed and the Senate bills and House bills that have just been passed that changed all this and made everybody's life so difficult this year. And also gave us some wonderful things as well, but also gave us a lot of new rules to comply with instantaneously overnight because of the emergency clauses in the Act. The reason that was given, and this is the biggie, the reason that was given for requiring this instantaneously was people are blowing themselves up. I will be the first person to tell you, if you think it's a good idea to take butane and use it without a closed loop system in a closed environment like an apartment while smoking a cigarette, which I've seen a video of someone doing, you're probably going to die. You may not die that day, you might not die the next day, but eventually you're going to blow yourself up. And it may not, in fact, be that's what caused you to blow yourself up. You may blow yourself up in another way simply because you're obviously quite reckless. You're going to hurt yourself, you may well hurt other people, you may burn down your apartment complex. Those sorts of things were the concerns the legislature had about extraction. That's why we got these instantaneous overnight rules and a ban on allowing people to do this without applying into the system. The big ones for, additionally, we have the admin rules. I talked a little bit about the statutory rules. The administrative rules are the rules that are made by the various bodies. So Oregon Health Authority has committees that get together and make rules on how the Oregon medical marijuana program is going to be administered. Those are found at the respective websites for each one of those, and you can click on those links and then go to the Oregon Administrative Rules section, which is another section of government that you can click on the link to. Now here's the thing, if you're looking at the rules, you should always be looking at the rules as they're listed on the website of the state agency that you're looking for, because the state's repository of rules is always generally a couple months behind. They don't update it automatically like they probably should in a modern system, but that just doesn't happen, which means if you go to the state database site that is supposedly the current set of rules, you will get the wrong rules. Don't do that. Always go to the state agency that you're concerned about, whether you're medical or recreational. Look at their rule list. It gets worse because we have rules that are permanent rules, we have temporary rules, we have emergency rules. Permanent rules are the ones that are in effect. Temporary rules are the ones that are proposed to go into effect during a common period unless they're somehow tweaked. Emergency rules come into play when things go completely awry, like what happened here with the processor's license, and they made an emergency rule to deal with that, which is you will be in compliance if you submit your application, even though we haven't approved your application, in the same way that everyone is used to the safety. Does everyone know what I mean when I say safety packets? Everybody knows that, okay, so safety packets are what we all carried around whenever you apply for your medical card. You've got this thick stack of documents with a receipt attached to it that says, I'm a medical marijuana patient, I sent my application in. Oregon Health Authority takes sometimes months to get me my thing back, so I have this just in case I get pulled over by the cops. These processor licenses work in the same way. You have what amounts to a safety packet as a processor if you follow all their steps. If you pay your money, if you submit the paperwork, if you do it within 5 days, if you pay the fees, if you get the email, the magical email back with your special number in it that you should write down in a very safe place and keep with you at all times whenever you're dealing with processing your site. Now, here's something that probably doesn't apply to most of you, because frankly, anybody who's been in this industry generally has a card. We're all used to that. We all know we had to have a caregiver card, a patient card, or a grower card in order, and I say grower card, it's person responsible for a grow site. I say grower, I'm just going to continue to say that unless it matters in a specific circumstance. So those cards allowed you to process previously. Now, with these new licenses, you don't have to have a card. You can have no medical marijuana card and have a medical processor's license. That was a relatively new thing. Dispensaries initially were what triggered that. Dispensary owners, interestingly enough, you don't have to be a medical patient to own a dispensary. You don't have to be a medical patient to work in a dispensary. You can handle marijuana, deal with marijuana, be involved in all that. without being patient or any of those things. OLCC is going to require a handler's permit, and I can tell you that if I was a betting man, I would bet on Oregon Health Authority also requiring a handler's permit at some point for employees who work in processing and work in dispensing, but we're not quite there yet. They haven't had time to make up more rules yet. So, let's see. Everyone knows how to apply to process. You know that you go to mmj.oregon.gov, you click on the link, you make the little online account. The biggest hurdle for most people is that it costs $4,000, and it's $4,000 they didn't know they needed to have until a couple weeks ago, and it has to be on a debit card, credit card, all those sorts of things. The other big one, the one that for a lot of clients they weren't aware of and that will actually cause problems, it used to be as a patient, you could be a patient with previous convictions, and you can still be a patient with convictions, but you couldn't be a grower or caregiver with certain felony Schedule I, Schedule II manufacturer delivery convictions, but you could still process. There will be people, and these are corner cases, but there will be people who had a patient card who were processing or who were involved in processing who cannot qualify. They cannot qualify to be a person responsible for a processing facility. They can't qualify as an owner of a facility. And those are circumstances where you're going to have to talk to perhaps friends or other family members or other people in your circle, because you're not going to be able to get that license. You may well be able to work for them, but you're not going to be able to actually hold the license yourself. Got to live in Oregon, you got to pay a bunch of money, you got to send in an ID card, you need to send in some fingerprints. You have to do all that within 5 calendar days, which used to be a bigger deal. Now you can upload everything online. It's much simpler. I recommend you never, ever, ever mail anything to Oregon Health Authority that you can upload digitally online to them, because the odds are that if it can be lost, it will be lost. So I never recommend you mail things in. If you can't figure out a way to scan something because it's too big, a lot of clients complain about sketches, documentation, certifications, all that sort of thing. Go to Kinko's, go to FedEx, go to somewhere that has a giant scanner, get it scanned in. Do not mail, and never mail them originals unless you absolutely have to mail them an original or something, because you will never get it back. It will be in their file forever, and the best they will ever do is make a copy of it for you. It's unlikely they will return it to you. So, it's kind of the basic overview. Oftentimes I think it's more helpful to answer people's questions and kind of go in a general around the room. You can raise your hands. This guy's ready with a question, ready to go. We've got a mic that we're going to bring back. That way everybody can hear you. Otherwise, you're just going to be screaming at me, and the people on the telecast are going to be very confused.
You were talking about not having felonies and then having another family member. Can my wife own a business if I have felonies?
Your wife can own a business while you have felonies, but there is the option of declining to accept your application both under OLCC and Oregon Health Authority, because they suppose that by being married to each other, you would commingle assets, commingle work, and that sort of thing. I think you can, there's ability to make a clear case to them that that would not occur in certain situations. I've even had husbands and wives come to me and say, hey, would it be easier if we just got divorced? And my answer is, yeah. But if you have certain felonies that would prevent you, I encourage you to apply. If they deny you based on that, we would then generally appeal and say, look, this person's not going to be involved in the day-to-day of this. This person just happens to be married to this person. Okay? Yeah. Anybody else got questions? Back right there.
Yeah, I'm interested in...
If you'll wait for the microphone, it will make the video so much better for all those other people.
Yeah, I'm interested in property zoning.
Okay. When you say you're interested in property zoning for each one of these, the big rule from Oregon Health Authority is this: you can't do it in a residential zone. For 99% of you, that's probably not going to matter. For people who are currently in a residential/commercial, or what's known colloquially as a grandfathered site, it will depend on your city or county's interpretation of whether or not they wish to consider that a commercial zone or a residential zone. Oregon Health Authority just requires that you provide them proof that it is not it's not residential. Now, once you get to the city or county level, they're going to have different rules about processing. Some of them don't have any rules at all because they weren't anticipating this. Others of them have draconian rules that make absolutely no sense. Others have rules that actually are pretty liberal, quite frankly, make a lot of sense. I get why someone wouldn't want a processing facility directly adjacent to a school playground. I understand that, at least from a logical standpoint. I can see why that makes sense. If you need to understand the zoning for your site, you're going to have to talk to planning within the city or the county that you're located in if you're located in an unincorporated area. That's going to, on this side of the mountain, and for most people, I assume that you're on this side of the mountain, the part of Oregon that is generally less cowboy, more progressive, right? So most of you are going to be on this side of the mountain. I grew up in a small town on a farm. I love farming, I love cowboys, I love horses, I love cattle, I love all those things. But a lot of those people are very, very conservative, and they've effectively banned marijuana production, processing, and everything else on that side of the mountain range, right? On this side of the range, you are looking at talking to the city or county and saying whether they've banned it. Now, there are certain small cities and counties, there are certain small cities that have gone absolutely crazy and banned everything. The easiest way to figure out where they are is looking for places that have really, really expensive houses. Lake Oswego is a good example of that. West Lynn's a good example of that. All these different counties and cities have gone, not in my backyard, we don't want this, you know, we can't stop this part, we can't stop it completely, we can't stop you from growing your 4 marijuana plants, we can't stop you from baking cookies at home, but what we can do is stop you from putting in a dispensary, putting in a production site, putting in a processing site. So, when you want to figure out whether or not you're going to be allowed to permanently place your processing site somewhere, which is different than the temporary application process, which is what we're in right now, you need to talk to planning and zoning and figure out how you're going to do build out, how you're going to do setup, how you're going to do all those things, and whether building and planning is going to give you approval for it. So, good example, let's say you want to set up a processing facility in Clackamas County. If you go to Clackamas County's zoning and planning website, they actually have a guideline chart that will show you where processing is allowed, where processing is not allowed. It's currently updated, and you can look at that, figure it out at least from the chart initially to give you an idea, and then you can put in a call or an email to a planner. And here's something I recommend. Anytime you're going to deal with the government, and you want them, and they tell you that you're allowed to do something, it's fine to call them on the phone. That's the simplest method. A lot of people want to say, hey, here's my address, I want to know whether we can put a processing site in. I'll be the first person to tell you that's how I do it when I'm dealing with a client. The client's looking at 5 different sites. But once they tell you that what you want to do is allowed or not allowed, you want to put it in written form. You want an email or a letter. An email is generally how a lot of these agencies work now. We've got government email system. You want something from someone who has some authority to say that you can do what you want to do, and you want it in writing so that 6 days later, when you start trying to pull your permit and the person down at the permit office tells you this is never allowed, you can't do this, there's no way this could ever happen, you have an email. You don't have to call me and convince me to figure out who told you could do it versus you couldn't do it and whether we can even prove they did that or not, and then I have to call over to planning and fix all that. It's much easier if you have an email that says from planning, this person at this address can in fact apply for this permit, can get a processor's license in this location, we've checked our system, we've checked the code. Okay? So that makes that so much simpler, so much easier, and you won't have to call me and pay me money or call your other attorney and pay him money or deal with this over and over and over again, which you will find in government, because if you have one government official who doesn't like marijuana at any point in the process, they can delay you for days, weeks, or months, or years. And that means that each step of the way, if you document what you're doing, it is much easier to get past the next government employee who may want to try to stop you. And some, a lot of them don't care. They're just doing their job. They see it as this box, yes. This box, no. They look at whatever it says in their form and they do what the form says. When it gets more complicated than that, and it particularly gets more complicated than that for a lot of uses in major cities. The big ones are going to be in Eugene, in Portland, in Bend, any place where you've got a large government office that deals with planning and building and everything else and has a longer history, you're going to encounter times where you may be looking at a property and it may be commercial and it's been commercial for the last 60 years, but when you go look at the zoning map, it's residential. And this is really true in Portland. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of lots in the city of Portland that look commercial, have always been commercial, have never been used as residential, that were rezoned as residential back when we went through a big rezoning. And they've simply been grandfathered in. And the city of Portland is fighting people on this. They're saying, if it's residential, you can't do it. We're not going to allow it. And that's currently a fight with the City of Portland and Office of Neighborhood Involvement. But each individual city and county planning is where you're going to have to go. If it's a big enough city or county and they've thought about it, a lot of times it's just on their website. You don't even have to talk to anybody. The other thing you can do, sometimes clients don't want to necessarily give out the address to planning. They don't want to deal with that part of it. You can call up and say, you can look around at other addresses, call up and get an idea of what their feel is for it, particularly with some of these smaller planning offices, and say, hey, I was looking at this property, not the address you're actually looking at. Would this be usable for marijuana processing? And if you find someone who's kind and polite and helpful, great. Get their name, get their number, make sure you talk to them next time when you call and ask about the other one, particularly when you want that confirmation email. Okay? Any specific questions about zoning beyond
I
that?
have another little question that kind of goes with that. If you are applying at that one address, and then, there's going to be some changing back and forth with the laws and regulations. Say that address then becomes not allowed. Do they take your license away? Are you allowed to move your address? Do you have to reapply? Say you want to move your address because you are moving or something.
Right.
Will they allow you to move that, or do you have to reapply?
You will have to reapply with the new address that you're going to use under the medical system right now, because it is address dependent. Once you have a certified site, you can then petition to move it to another location, but you're going to have to go through the similar process all over again. One thing is, if you do have an address and it's approved, or the local city council or planning changes things before you get approval and attempt to block you from doing what you were doing, we can oftentimes appeal that and say, look, this was already in play. This, if the county, for example, had no regulations about marijuana, and lots of them don't. Lots of them have just said, that's too much work, we don't care, we're not dealing with it, we're not going to deal with it. And then you go in and you actually put the application in, you get approved and you're cited, oftentimes you will be grandfathered in. I've had clients who were in non-approved locations after the fact because the city or county came in and made new regs, but when we went to them and said, look, we were already here, you can't make us move after we applied under the old rules, and the old rules should apply to us, and we've gotten them to accept that in certain circumstances. I have had one city who failed to return my call and then within a week made a new rule. And so that's why sometimes you don't necessarily want to alert them immediately to what you're doing unless you have to, especially for smaller ones. The bigger counties and cities have thought this out. They've had to deal with it, they've wanted to deal with it, they want to regulate it. I don't encounter too many clients who have problems with that at this point, because marijuana has been legal long enough that most of them have come up at least with some minimal set of guidelines to deal with it. My favorite, Josephine County. It's 2 pages. It says basically, do what you want. Come down, we'll give you a permit. Jackson County, directly next to me, not so much. That's why I like Josephine County. Any other zoning questions while we're on the topic of zoning? Right here, just show.
If you're in one of the counties that has that temporary ban
From OLCC?
for the processing.
Well, that's Oregon liquor. So that ban is related to recreational processing. If you're in one of those counties, you could still apply and get a medical processing license unless they've attempted to ban medical processing under their zoning statute, which I don't necessarily think they have the authority to do, although they could try. But if you're talking about applying for a recreational license,
No, not recreational, just.
so under medical, those bans are a function of the OLC, of the recreational market licenses. Those are not a function of the medical market licenses. You could still apply in those counties for a medical processor's license.
Oh, okay. So if we're in one of those counties, just do the paper.
You can do the paperwork. Now, you may hit a snag with the city or county you're in, because the city or county may say, suddenly decide we're not going to allow this here and try to make an end run around your application. That's why one of the things I suggest, if you're doing these applications in non-favorable counties, you may want to consider getting a copy of the GIS. Does everyone grab? GIS is a mapping tool that we use in Oregon and pretty much around the world to look at maps. Most counties and cities have a GIS system that shows whether something's residential, commercial, or some other designation. You can oftentimes print a copy of that from the government website and submit it to the Oregon Health Authority to show that you're not in residential without actually tapping it. Will not exist after the end of the year. Most of the medical dispensaries that I think will continue to exist will primarily be in cities and counties where recreational fails on the November ballot. Does everyone know that in November, most of the counties and cities that have tried to opt out are going to have votes, and that people are going to get to override their oftentimes bizarre city commissioners or county commissioners' views on these things? If those bans stay in effect, though, pre-existing medical dispensaries and pre-existing processors would still be allowed in those places. And so you're going to have some gaps, particularly for people who are manufacturing edibles, where you're going to have to make a decision about whether you're going to maintain a processor's license for making edible products that are solely sold to medical dispensaries in places where recreational facilities can't exist.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Other questions?
My question was about the cohabitation. Multiple people in one site.
So when we're talking about cohabitation, you're talking about having multiple processors located in the same facility.
Correct.
Okay. We are not sure how OHA is going to deal with that, whether they're going to allow it or not, or whether they're going to allow essentially a cohabitation or shared space rental. What we do know is that you can only have one PRP. So you can only have one person responsible for a processing site. One of the things with clients who are talking about doing cohabitation is it may behoove you to talk to each other about the possibility of creating one single entity to do the license application and having an LLC that would then divide or set up profits in a profit-sharing manner or partnership manner. That's a more complex question, though, that I think would be better answered on an individual basis. If you've got, I have clients who want to set up essentially a marijuana warehouse where they've got 10 people who are all doing processing, edibles, production, and those sorts of things, similar to what we see in Colorado, particularly in Denver. But we're not sure how they're ultimately going to end up on that. If clients are interested in putting an application in with multiple in the same spot, I think you can do it. Just be aware if all but one of them get denied, you're going to be in kind of a fight. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks. So just to follow up on that, so not that it's any of my business, but you're just going to have one license for this facility, like say for here,
I would never answer a question about a client publicly on television.
Okay, sorry.
That would never happen.
Saying it's safe to assume, right?
Yeah.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, there would be one license for a single warehouse. Yes, most clients will likely have a single license for a warehouse, and what they would do is they would either have a partnership agreement or some other sort of agreement. So for example, let's say I have a client who has in excess of 8 machines. Each one of the machines is owned by a different person. They're all sited at one space. They share an employee. That employee runs all the different machines because half of the machines are for organic, half of the machines are for non-organic material. That employee runs the space. As of right now, it's a relatively informal agreement, but because of all these new rules and regulations, what we would likely do is set up a holding company. We would set up an LLC. That LLC would be owned in certain percentages by the number of machines that each person owned and the production that's being done on those machines, and then there would be an operating agreement that would lay out how profits and everything else would be distributed. There would be one single license for that site, rather than having to pay for 8 licenses and pay 32. It's not cheap to do it my way, because the LLC is not going to cost nearly as much as all those licenses. So you can consolidate the licenses into a single site, but have multiple pieces of equipment that you're running.
And all those 8 people could go write tickets at dispensaries?
Yeah, because they would be using the processor's number, and they would be employees of the facility, and they would have the right to transfer.
Thank you.
So you're saying if there's 8 employees and one processing number, an employee can still use that number? If one person holds the license in their name and says, these are my employees, than that.
Right, in the same way that when you walk into a dispensary, it doesn't matter which employee helps you. The MMD number for the dispensary is what goes on the receipt. So
But it's not like a caregiver, you don't have to list them on there?
no, they're not a caregiver. They'll have a marijuana transfer authorization form. If you go to mmj.oregon.gov and go to the processor's link, there's a transfer authorization form that you use for transfers to dispensary of extract. Right here. Sorry.
I guess this goes beyond the zoning, but they're concerned about the explosions and the safety and stuff like that. Has the state written a standard that they expect everybody to build out to as far as the safety and things like that?
They've written a standard in terms of pressure vessels. So that's what we have right here. So for example, if you have a Subzero Scientific unit, this certificate is what the state will be expecting to see to show that this product has been evaluated by engineers to show that the product isn't going to explode on you when you're using it. That it's a pressure vessel that's rated appropriately, that it's rated for a certain PSI, and all those wonderful mechanical and engineering things that I could frankly try to pretend to talk about, but I'm not going to because it's not
Well,
what I do.
about the building then.
The building rules have not been set yet by Oregon Health Authority. What they have said is the current rule set requires that it be a spark-proof room, that it have limit detectors, and that there be an eye wash station. They haven't said what a spark-proof room looks like. They haven't said all that. Now, there's two ways that they can deal with this. One, OHA can simply absolve itself of all those problems and say, you know what, this is the city and county's problem. They need to define what spark-proof room means. They need to define what all these things mean, and they're going to go do that. Likely what's going to happen is the Oregon Health Authority is going to say, these are the standards that we expect you to follow. They'll probably use the National Fire, I want to say NFC, National Fire Code? National Fire Code Manual for Spark-Proof Room. They'll refer to that. That'll get them out of having to deal with any of it, and they'll just say it needs to be built to this code. Now it's the fire inspector's problem for whatever county or city you're in to come in and say, this is the room, it looks great, or this room looks terrible, tear it down and build another one. We don't have those rules yet, and I don't expect to have them for probably at least another month or so. They're going to be working on those, but they're also concerned right now with all the other rule changes that they need to fix, and all the people who are calling them and going absolutely nuts because you can't sell edibles to limited rec patients right now, or oil to limited rec patients, and that's making all of the dispensaries nuts in the head because they're losing all that money to Washington State. And so they've got all those other things they're trying to get on top of. I think we'll probably see a spark-proof room designation within the next month or so.
Thank you.
She was next, right there, and then we'll keep trying.
Yeah, sorry it's taking a minute, but we got this.
Yeah.
So I had a question regarding like inventory tracking systems and kind of specifics with that. If a company, a processing site was shut down during the middle of production during this emergency clause, how will we go about getting, once we're approved for registration, if we are like then tracking our inventory? Do we bring
You take an inventory of what you have at the time.
and we
when
can
you
bring that in? Okay.
Well, no, you take an inventory of what you had.
Okay.
So if you were producing prior to the ban going in effect, that was material that was produced before the ban. The material that's produced after the ban will be added in inventory. On the day you get your processor's license, you would sit down, we have this much trim, we have this much extract that was pre-made before the ban, we have all these things, and start keeping a record book. And here's the thing I'm going to tell you. In the old days, everybody threw away receipts. No, everybody burned them. People didn't keep books. I remember. I had clients where I would try to give them a receipt for coming to see me, and they would laugh at me and tell me to throw it away. Those days are over, okay? If you're going, and I say that at a state law level, marijuana is still federally legal. We all know that. I have to say that now. The bar makes me say that. Marijuana is federally legal. Under Oregon state law, we have a different system. Nowadays, you should keep every scrap of paper, every bit of it. Because honestly, you have a much greater chance of having the IRS come in and try to audit you than you have in the federal government coming in a criminal prosecution if you're following the state law, being responsible, using closed loop system, doing what you're supposed to, tracking inventory, and jumping through all those hoops. The odds of you being their target is slim to none. But the odds of you being the target of an OHA inspection, an IRS audit, or a city audit, or a county audit, those are huge. So, Every scrap of paper that comes in, keep track of it. Every ounce, every gram of marijuana that comes in, keep track of it. If you're used to the old system, and look, I remember the old days of trash bags of trim, and like it didn't matter, and just throw it in the tarp, and we'll get to it later. 6 months later, someone decides to do the run. Can't do that anymore. When it comes through the door, you need to know who's bringing it in, what the numbers are, what the weight is. You need to verify what they think the weight is. I recommend you weigh it in front of them. Know every bit of information that you can. More information is better than less. The government can get really upset with you for not remembering small bits of data, but if you can say, look, we have a tracking system, here's how it works, it comes in, it goes through this process, here's the tracking sheet, here's what happens every time someone comes through. Most inspectors won't even bother to open the book. And I know because I've been inside when they've done an inspection before. I've been in a dispensary. I was helping the client try to figure out what would happen in the event of an inspection when the inspector showed up. Okay? The client had the proper documents such that most of the time when the inspector looked, he went, how do you do this? He's like, here's our sheet on that. How do you do this? Here's our sheet on that. How do you do this? Here's our giant file cabinet of that. And the inspector went, great, check, check, check. I'm not going to look, I don't care, it's fine. Check. That's how you get through the inspections. If they come in and you say, I don't know, somebody dropped some stuff off yesterday, I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, you're going to lose your license. That's what's going to happen. The old days are gone. If you're going to live in that paradigm, you're not going to be able to live in a medical marijuana state or a recreational marijuana state. You're going to have to live in one of those dark states where people go to prison for the rest of their natural life for the amount of oil that comes out of a Subzero machine. The amount of oil that comes out of a 5-pound Subzero machine will send you to prison for the rest of your natural life in Mississippi. Okay? Ever. The rest of your life. If you want to live in a state where you can make that, do that legally, sell that, have a good career, have a good job, be a productive citizen, pay your taxes, and do all those wonderful things that all of us in the marijuana industry, frankly, have begged for years. We're one of the few groups of people who actively begged to be taxed. Who said, hey, guys, come on, we'd love to be taxed. Just let me write you a check. I'd be happy to. If you would just not throw me in prison, I'd be happy to do that. That's where we're at now. That's where we've made it to. But that means that we've got to act like all the other businesses. And in fact, we don't have to just act like all the other businesses. We have to act like a highly regulated business that the government thinks that we're all criminals in. And that's the way they're going to treat us for some time because things haven't always been this way. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right, but that's the system that we live under right now. And it's my job and a lot of other people's job to make sure that you stay out of trouble. These days, you're much more likely to risk losing, you lose your license, or maybe you'll have some civil liability and have to pay a fine, but nobody's going to prison anymore because you got 5 pounds of oil sitting in your car. As long as you got your receipts and everything else is in order, you're good to go. The officer will send you along and tell you to have a nice day. I remember when that was not the case, and I think most of you probably do too, unless you're very new to the industry. Okay? Then we have back, then there, then there.
I just wanted to touch back quickly on the rig certification that you brought up.
Yeah.
Is there a list of pre-approved rigs that Oregon has, or is it based off of the certifications?
It's based off specifications in each closed loop system or each system getting tested by an independent engineer, or if it's made from equipment that already has certifications by engineers to show that it's pressure rated for the proper ratings, then you could probably go through that way. Almost any supplier of a closed loop system in Oregon from here on out, if you're buying equipment, you need to be very clear, has this equipment been approved? Is it in the process of being approved? If I spend my hard-earned money and I want to buy this equipment and it's in the pre-approval process and it doesn't get approved, are you going to give me my money back? Okay? For Subzero, that's easy because they did that because we've had to deal with that with Washington, we've had to deal with that with other states because they make equipment that was already being used in other medical states. We don't have that problem with them. But, these systems you see online, a lot of the systems that are sold as do-it-yourself kits, they're never going to pass. They're not going to work. If you want to get one of the do-it-yourself kits or you have the mechanical aptitude to build a system, you could pay to have it certified. As Lou will tell you, that's not cheap.
And what about if you wanted to weld on a handle or something like that? Would you have to get it pre-verified, or would you be able to make small?
Anytime you're going to do a weld onto a steel, you're going to have to get a recertification of it. So what I've recommended for if you need to use the equipment in a way that it wasn't necessarily designed to do, you're not going to want to do welds to it, you're not going to want to do additions to it. And I'll be the first person to tell you that metal stress, even from simple things like dropping things, there's a reason that once you've had a wreck with a bicycle helmet, you're not supposed to use it anymore. It doesn't work well anymore. Metal works in the same way. If you stress metal inappropriately, if you see bulges in it, things like that, it needs to be retested, recertified, reapproved. Okay? And that's basic safety. And this is coming from someone who I've watched someone with 80% burns all over their body try to live their life, and it's very, very, very difficult. Thankfully, that person had access to medical cannabis and could deal with the constant pain that they were in for the rest of their natural life. But it's not something you want to toy with. Nobody's life is worth being blown up over, I don't want to spend the money on getting things fixed properly. Okay? Yeah. There.
Sort of piggyback on his question. So, in the documents they released, they said it needs to be from a professionally manufactured company. But you mentioned that if you want to weld it yourself and pay to have it certified, I guess what makes the definition of a professionally manufactured company?
It would generally be someone who is professionally, so for example, if you were a professionally certified welder, let's say that you were certified to weld or you had gone through the training necessary to do that, you could submit to them in the same way. For example, when I'm qualifying an expert in court, if I say this person's an expert in physics and the district attorney says, well, how do I know they're an expert in physics or they're a professional in their field? I would say, well, they've got a doctorate in physics from the following university. They've done physics work for the last 15 years. And they would go, no, yeah, you're right, it's fine. You submit something saying, I've done welding for the last 20 years of my life. I'm a professional welder. This is what I do by trade. I've submitted it to the following engineering group, and they've certified it as professionally crafted. Same deal. Most of the time, a simple attorney's letter would be enough. You could probably do it yourself with a little bit of back and forth with Oregon Health Authority.
Yeah, as far as being the welder, there's that's ASME Section 9 welder. The person welds it together does. So like all the stuff in our shop, I used to weld it myself back when we started in my garage and stuff before anything was certified. But now that we are all certified, we have only one guy that welds everything that holds pressure in the shop. So he's our certified guy. So anytime you have something that's built to be certified, the person welding it has to have their individual certificate, which is not an impossible thing to get. It's just, showing up and getting your certification to be a welder at the right place and showing that you can do certain tests. And so, that's basically as far as manufacturing one on your own. That would be the way to get the first step going.
So yeah, I learned something new. I had no idea you had that sort of certification. I just know the general overview and then I know the law, but it's always good to learn something new from them. Yeah. In the back.
Do I have to have a license to own a closed loop system to make my own medicine for my own personal use?
When you say you have to have a license to own a closed loop, no. You can own a closed loop system without a license. The moment you use it, you have to have a license. If you, for your own personal use, personal extraction in the state of Oregon was banned in the latest legislative session. That was not the case up until right now. Yeah.
Then what is the rules regarding if I have my own trim to take to a business just to make extraction for my own personal use, not to sell, not to,
You can. OHA is making up a set of rules that will allow you to take medical marijuana or other marijuana products to a processor, present them with those products, and then have that processor certify the products. The problem right now is that, and they're trying to work this out, is that when you take marijuana to a processor, it's in particular a hydrocarbon processor, not CO2, but hydrocarbon processor, they're going to be concentrating down whatever's in that product. And what the state is concerned with is if you are using pesticides, I'm not saying you are, but just hear me out. If you're using pesticides that might not be a problem in flour because they're not particularly concentrated or they might burn off, those pesticides will get concentrated in the solvent process. And so they're trying to figure out a way to make sure that you don't end up with a product that has too high pesticide level for medical marijuana patients. I think what they're ultimately going to do is go one of two routes. They're either going to require the material be tested before it be returned to you, or they're going to require that the material be transferred to a dispensary or a nonprofit medical dispensary, which is a new designation of medical dispensaries that's allowed this year, to then be tested and transferred back to you to assure people that they're not concentrating down pesticides that they weren't where they were testing down. Now, I have mixed feelings about that. I recognize as someone who, you know, I am in that lucky class of people who I can afford a 5-pound Subzero unit, right? I, as a person, just me, myself, not running it for anybody else. Most people weren't in that category, and most of the equipment that was being used by people who were doing their own home processing was not necessarily of the best design or particularly safe, and so I get why they kind of pushed us in that direction. The fact that it has to be tested in order to assure you that the extracts that you're getting don't have pesticides in them, although it is going to increase costs for patients, I think the addition of the nonprofit medical dispensaries that will accept that material and get it tested at the lowest price possible for you and then transfer it back to you is a good compromise. I think that's probably the best that we could have hoped for under the current system.
So is that in effect now?
That is in effect now. You can apply for a new nonprofit dispensary
Talking
license.
about taking your trim, when is that going to be?
It's in effect right now. If you want trim to be processed into marijuana, what I've recommended for most medical patients is talk to your local dispensaries, talk to people who are in the community. I think most medical dispensaries would find it compassion in their heart to make sure that you get the medicine you need, and if that means they need to take in extract and have it tested for you and then transferred back to you, I would hope that you would be able to find a local dispensary who's willing to do that for you. I have a difficult time believing any of my clients wouldn't try to be helpful to someone in that situation. So I think you should be able to find someone to help you. The other thing I can tell you is you can make all sorts of other you can make concentrates without that. So if it involves ethanol, if it involves glycerin, if it involves even some of the really, really terribly dangerous solvents that are not hydrocarbons, that make a pure product even than can often be made in just a basic like pentane or pH propane system. Those are concentrates for the purposes of the law, they're not extracts. I recommend that most clients stick to basic ethanol, dry sift, CO2 dry sift applications rather than trying to do high-level extractions using very dangerous solvents themselves. That's just a bad idea. But they are considered concentrates for the time being, things like water and bubble and all that. There was another question in the back, right there.
First of all, thank you for coming and sharing all your knowledge with us. It's amazing.
Not a problem.
I was just curious if by any chance, since this started on Friday, that people could get their processing licenses, if you even happen to have an idea of, like, is there a way to know, like, how many people have actually applied?
There isn't a way to know currently, but I would tell you by month's end, what you're going to see is a list of everyone who's applied. And what I generally tell clients is assume that if you have 100 people applying for a license, 20% of them will fail for the simple fact that they didn't get around to doing what they needed to do. So for every 100 licenses, I generally assume 80 will be in the temporary stage and will actually make it to the being processed stage. I would tell you to assume then about half those are going to fail for various other reasons, not necessarily related to OHA, but maybe related to local land use planning, related to they didn't bother to get the build-out permit, they didn't get their readiness application in on time, all those things. But that list will be up, and in theory, OHA is supposed to update it. It hasn't been updated yet. Actually, I can check. I can see if it's there yet.
I know you're good at multitasking.
I am.
You already are doing that. So even though you've given us all these different websites to look at and different ideas of the county law, the civil, all these different groups, wouldn't it be good for us to just basically do our homework, fill out the application, but probably go to you to like make sure that we crossed our T's and dotted our I's with everything?
I will always tell clients I'm a fan of DIY. I always appreciate people coming to me and giving me their hard-earned money for me to help them make sure everything goes smoothly. I'm also not the lawyer who's going to say everybody needs to come down and talk to me.
Right, I mean, some people
What I tell people is do everything that you can, see how you feel about it. The actual application itself is pretty simple. That being said, what's going to trip up most people and where I think that coming in to sit down with an attorney is probably the most important thing is when you're dealing with land use and planning and you're dealing with fire code and you're dealing with build out. So many clients find it really easy to get the documents in, but they had a contractor come in and build something and he kind of didn't really pull the permit because in the old days we didn't pull permits because they would send us to prison. I know, I remember. It was terrible. Some of the things that I saw, the amount of lamp cord that was strewn throughout rooms. Like, I watched a power cable melt off a house once. If that tells you how badly someone wired something. The actual cable went, it just melted. And you watched it drop, and then it finally came off, and the house caught on fire. If you go to information for marijuana processors, they have pending processing application. They haven't updated yet. So I know there are people who've done everything they're supposed to do. It's not up yet. But it's Tuesday. They just got around to it on Friday. I generally tell people, don't freak out. Government runs slow. These are all new rules. These are all government employees who are trying to get up to speed on all of it. Give them a week. If you absolutely, positively have to be sure that everything's happened, you can call them and request, or email them and request that they give you verbal or give you, and I recommend email confirmation that you've submitted everything. And if you've done that, that email should be sufficient to show you that you can then extract and that you're in the clear in terms of getting things done. Just give them a little bit of time, because honestly, if every single one of us calls OHA, they get less work done. They just do, because they got to pick up the phones. Sometimes I think they really do just turn the phone off to get work done. I understand. Sometimes I turn my phone off for an hour to get work done. Other questions? Over here. And by the way, it's 8:30 right now. Lou, I can talk for generally 6 to 8 hours at a time. I've been trained to do that. I don't think you want to be here for that long. Let me know when we're kind of close to closing. And,
no worries, we can run it till later.
Okay. No worries. Just want to make sure everybody knows and we kind of get some of the questions in. So we got about 30 minutes left on this.
Is the state actually going to be offering us like a safer form of banking?
So here's the problem. And this is a real problem. Banking is regulated by the federal government. At the state level, banking is somewhat regulated by the state, and the state has said, we will not punish anyone who does anything related to banking as long as they follow all the banking rules they're supposed to under the Cole Memorandum, which is great. Bankers by nature are conservative people. Okay, you don't start a bank because you woke up one morning and decided to be a political activist. Okay? It's not the way it works. I know, I have friends who are bankers. I studied economics for a long time, and I have a lot of friends who do that for them. Very conservative people, very tight people, okay? Which means when they look at the risk of something and they go, well, you know, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that the government would give us problems about this, banker goes, 1 in 1,000, that's ridiculous. No, 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 no. Shut it down. Shut it down right now. That's the problem that we have. We're dealing with a very conservative industry. My experience has been local banks are much more likely to help you than big out-of-state banks. Local branches are much more likely to help you, particularly local branches in progressive places. Will they still shut your account down when if you say anything about it or mention it? Yeah. It will. Right now, MAPS Credit Union is one of the few openly taking accounts and having taken accounts in the past and continuing to take accounts. Therefore, people located in Polk and Marion County, although if you had a business located there, they may consider taking you on. There are substantial fees, there are substantial risks. They could still close your account. What I've told clients is this continues to unfortunately be a cash industry. You should deal with it in that manner and be thoughtful about it in that manner. It's one of the few things that's still like the old days. We still, that's a lot of 20s, just put them in a bag. It's a lot of 20s, put them in a bag. Because we deal in an industry where we've got to pay our taxes in cash, we've got to pay sometimes even our employees in cash, we receive payments in cash. Credit card processors won't work with us, or they want to charge us 16%. Which is, by the way, a higher rate than they charge brothels. If that gives you an idea of where they place this on the scale. My advice to clients has been, it's from the old drug dealer days, don't put your money where you put your supply. Don't put your money in your stash house. Keep it separate, right? So most clients have a separate location. Some clients have gone so far as to buy a bank, an old bank that's no longer a bank, to get access to the vault. I think there are safer ways to deal with that. I think there are more intelligent ways than like necessarily needing a $2 million building. But if you happen to have $100 million you need to put somewhere, bank's probably a good idea. But as of right now, banking is subject to federal banking regulations. Anyone who would try to open a bank to deal with marijuana clients is subject to federal critical. I deal with 2 CPAs primarily. I deal with PDX Bookkeeping, which is Katie Landis. I deal with New Era CPAs as well. Both of them are involved in this segment of the industry. My recommendation to you is get a marijuana savvy CPA. If you don't, when tax time comes around or you ever get audited, you're going to owe a very large check that you're not going to enjoy writing. It's far better to plan to pay 50% in taxes on your profits than it is to pay 40% for 5 years and then suddenly realize 1 year you've got to write your entire profits to the federal government because you got audited and you weren't paying in accordance with 280E. And that's a problem. A good CPA will build you a cost of goods sold model for your business that will help to lower your tax burden. I don't do that. I don't want anything to do with taxes. I studied tax law previously. I'm good at it. I don't want to do it. It makes my head hurt. Your CPA is the person to go to. Katie Landis at PDX Bookkeeping, and her first name is spelled in an odd way. It's Katye. Landis, and then New Era CPAs is also a CPA firm here in Portland that deals with this.
I have a question.
Yep.
About hiring someone who isn't Oregon resident or owning a business, how long do you have to be an Oregon resident?
How long do you have to be an Oregon resident to what?
To own a processing business.
Currently, in order to own, and I want to say, I don't know if they fixed that or not. They fixed it for, I believe, and I don't remember, I don't want to check. Because they fixed it for patients. Patients don't require residency for any longer than just becoming a patient. You become a patient on the day you become an Oregon resident, that's fine. For growers and dispensary owners and all the rest, they kept it in there. I don't know off the top of my head. I believe they kept the rule the same though as dispensaries, and it's a 2-year residency look back for processing site owners, which would be consistent with what they were requiring for growers and caregivers and all of that. But I'll give you my card, you can shoot me an email and I'll be able to look it up later. But I don't want to take time away from the rest of it right now.
So I had a question. I was reading about testing requirements that are going to go into place after October 1st. Mm-hmm. And live resin extraction is a big part of the cannabis industry. But after October 1st, if we have to have all product that we're receiving tested prior to it being transferred to the processing site, is that going to change like the live resin extraction part of the industry?
So if you have to have the material tested before transferring, I think...
Because then under the testing regulations, it talks about it has to be so dry as well.
Right, and so that will change that portion of the industry. Unless OHA gets enough feedback from everyone that we don't want that to happen, then there may be a change in the rule set. It's the same issue we're dealing with right now with edibles, where they want to make edibles dosed at 5 milligrams, which I don't think that makes a huge amount of sense. I get why they're trying to do it. They're trying to protect people. They need pushback. And one of the things, and for some of them, here's the thing. The people who are making these rules don't do what you guys do. Okay, they have no idea. When I deal with government officials, like legislators, most legislators have a concept of people smoking marijuana, right? They get that people smoke it. Some of them smoke it. I can't tell you which ones, but I can tell you some of them do. But the ones who are making the rules oftentimes have no clue what any of you guys do for a living, how what you do works, or what the rules should look like for it. The only way that they get any information about that is usually after the fact when people come in screaming and go, you just destroyed my ability to make a living. What are you doing? Why did you make that rule? And they go, I don't know. I don't know enough about it. Nobody came and told me about it. Nobody gave me any information, so we made a rule. And that's where we're at. Other times they can't make a rule for everything. What they're trying to do is deal with, 80, 90% of the industry. There's that 10% of the industry that makes certain products that they don't have any knowledge of. They're not necessarily being informed about. The only way to get that to change is to go to OHA and say, we use a process that's different than what is prescribed here. We either need an exception or we need a rule change in order to make this functional. And that's the only way. So live resin is one of those things where it's a small enough niche in the market that you're not going to get a standard rule that's going to deal with it right away. You're going to have to go to them and say, look, we want to work on this. Can we work on this? Can you make this happen for us? And one of the easy ways is to approach the people who are on the board that deals with those things. And those board members are listed, by the way, on the website. So you can always get their email addresses, start up a conversation, and start letting them know, hey, you're going to put this very useful product out. We're not going to be able to make this anymore. I would like an exception, or I would like a new rule change.
Just another one on testing. I heard the new pesticide testing is going to be $350 addition to the state compliance. The state compliance is going to go to around $600 in October.
Well, let's step back for a second. When you say state, what do you?
State compliance for shelf, for medical or recreational.
State, I'm still not understanding. I can't hear you very clearly.
Compliance test is mold-related pesticide.
Right, and I understand that part. The pricing for testing is not set by the state.
Correct.
It's set by the labs.
But they are setting what we have to test for.
Right.
And then I'm saying that the pesticide test that's coming is 350 plus.
I can't
included in the compliance after October.
Sure, and what I'm telling you is I can't.
Are we allowed to process, return to the patient or the client, and then them test and shelf?
As of right now, no.
So, where's the cost? We're going to have to be responsible for.
As an economics major, I will tell you the cost is always passed to the consumer. The person at the end of the chain will ultimately pay the cost because it's going to get passed on to them no matter what.
So we'll be the only ones to take processed material to the dispensary.
You will be.
Processor.
So processors will take material that's processed and transfer it to a dispensary.
Right.
There is a question about creating a rule set that will possibly allow transfer back to a patient.
Yes.
And that's questionable as to how testing will work with that. But any material that is ultimately processed by you will have to be tested at some point in the chain before it gets to the consumer. Who will ultimately be required to do that test? That can change in between now and then. But after October, yes, the testing will be there. It will be costly. And I know that, and I realize that simply because we've gone from a system where there were no tests.
4 times.
Yeah. There were no tests to now we have incredible testing. Now that being said, you can test much larger batches now than you used to be able to. For small producers, that's problematic, and I know that.
That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, for small producers, that's hard, and I don't know that there's necessarily a great way around that. What I would tell you is, in the balance...
It's harder for a smaller client than a small producer. A grower, a small grower.
Sure, for a small grower who wants to create extracted products, they're probably going to get pushed out of the market, and I don't think that's... I think that's the reality of if you want to be producing marijuana at a scale that is commercially viable, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be pushed out of making extracts, and they're going to either have to move to a market where you can produce extracts, or they're going to have to be making concentrates which don't require that intense level.
Or your business will just have to be priced accordingly to a smaller batch and a higher price.
And one of the things I'll say, if you're making a high quality product at a higher price, there's plenty of people who will buy it. For every person who walks into a store and buys a PBR, there's another guy who walks into the custom beer store next to my house, Belmont Station, and pays $16 for a beer. If you're producing a product that people want badly enough, I think the testing will become a smaller part of it. But the state and the balance had to make a decision, and the decision, I think, to protect consumers when you're concentrating down pesticides is a pretty important one, at least from my vantage point.
It's going to run through the processor.
Yeah.
Also, like you were saying before, a lot of these things, these are written by people that don't have any clue. So the more that we can show up at, like, when they have meetings at town halls and stuff and speak what we, experience on our end, the more the laws are going to benefit us in the future. And, it's a very changing tides, and the currents are going a lot of different directions right now. Laws come, laws go, windows open and close, and so the more that we can be in there and be an active part of the system, the more that we can get the laws to kind of work towards our favor.
If you don't tell them what you want, no one's going to tell them for you. And you live in one of the few, you live in a state that's small enough to actually have an effect. You live in a state with less than 5 million people. When you call an elected representative's office in the state of Oregon, there is usually someone there who will talk to you, and they may not agree with you, but they will listen to what you have to say and they will take it into consideration. If you have one person calling, that's not the most effective thing in the world. When they get a call from 100 people, and someone took the time to get 100 people to call a state representative about something, from their vantage point, that's 100 people who are about to tell someone not to vote for them. And that will get their attention. But if you don't say anything, they're never going to hear it from anybody else, because all they're going to hear is marijuana, make it safe, yeah, make it safer, make it safer, make it safer. They've got to hear something from the other side that says we don't necessarily need a $3,000 testing regime. We need a less expensive testing regime. Okay?
So I'm part of the Oregon Edibles Council, and so we've got like 20 different edibles companies, and we're trying to figure out essentially this issue with the 5 milligrams. We did a lot of research. The doctors actually said there's 30 years of research from Switzerland and Canada programs where 10 milligram dosage is not a problem. They've never had one reported issue. They also actually spoke to the idea that children have less receptors, and then the testing lab said 5 milligrams. They can't within enough confidence intervals to make sure it's an accurate test.
Correct.
They said 10 milligrams is the absolute minimum they can actually do to get any sort of accurate reading on it. So what I'm trying to figure out is there a good way to approach this? Because they say they don't care about either the testing at this point, nor do they care about the information outside that they have to operate under an overabundance of caution for children, which is a huge push-button caution word. And so we're trying to figure out what's the best way to approach this, because we don't want to tick anybody off, but we'd like to, give something that's effective to people rather than giving something that's like placebo, and have unintended consequences out there.
There are a couple ways to go about that. The first way is to go to them and ask them. Once you're told by a government agency they don't want to hear it anymore, then you go to journalists. That's the second way of dealing with government agencies that don't listen to what you have to say. The third way is going to your legislators. The way that I would recommend most edible councils consider dealing with it is, and this is something I pushed for in the past, if you are big enough to have enough members where this impacts you and it impacts you directly, you need a lobbyist. Because you need someone in the legislature who is willing, who literally go, and that's what a lobbyist is. A lobbyist is someone who gets paid to advocate your position, point blank. That's what people who are lobbyists do. They go to the legislature and they say, look, this matters to us. It matters to us for these reasons. Here's why it matters. This is really important. And it's not just important to Bob, okay? Bob down the street who calls you every Wednesday because he doesn't have anything else to do. This is important to my clients who pay millions of dollars in taxes in order to keep their businesses running and make our state flourish, and that matters to them. So if you don't listen to us, and I go back to my client and I say, you don't listen to us, they will say to all the people they know, I want that guy out. Because that's what politicians listen to. They listen to people who come in and say, we're going to throw your ass out if you don't do something that is effective and that makes our government work. If you want to convince OHA that 5 milligrams isn't going to be the limit, I would tell you, I think honestly your window is passed. I think you guys are going to be stuck with it, at least in the short term. Until we get the testing results that say they can't give an accurate test and they can't get within that 10% range that's required for homogenization, which is what I've said over and over again. The only product I've seen that can get into that homogenization range is Marinol. Marinol comes in a low dose enough, but you're talking about a pill that costs hundreds of dollars for a bottle.